Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. So just a quick note before we start the talk with Suzi Wrenshaw. She asked me to just clarify that she no longer works at the NHS hospital since the start of the year, so she's got a full-time practice, private practice. Okay, so enjoy. Hello everyone. So today we're here with Suzi Wrenshaw. She is a certified yoga therapist specializing in mental health, trauma, attachment, alongside dissociative disorders and functional neurological disorders. She's qualified to deliver yoga cognitive behavioral therapy, yoga therapy, EMDR, emotional freedom techniques, and Ayurveda. So I've printed this whole list out because it was huge. I wouldn't remember it all, and I didn't think writing down all this was a good idea. Suzi also works as a yoga therapist for Salford Royal Hospital, NHS Foundation Trust within the Specialist of Non-Epileptic Attack Disorder Service. This is part of the Clinical Neuropsychology Department in Manchester Centre for Clinical Neurosciences. Suzi has trained with Caroline Spring, Lisa Cayley Isley, Lucy Arnsby Wilson, Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate, Peter Levine, Gary Carter, Ralph Marzan, and that's wonderful to have you here. So welcome, Suzi. Thank you for being here. I was overwhelmed when I saw your credentials. I was like, wow, she's amazing. So I'm really grateful that you're here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Shira. It's lovely to be here, and thanks for taking responsibility for doing that long list in your introduction as well, rather you than me.
Yeah, well, in the beginning when I started the podcast, I was like, I'll do that separately. Maybe it makes the guest uncomfortable, or I screw up. And then I need a few recordings. Okay, so please tell us about your yoga story and how it became yoga therapy and why you're so passionate about it, or just let us know.
Yeah, so there's kind of two versions of this story. So one of them is about yoga and the various ways that yoga's popped in and out of my life before it became a really regular feature and really a life practice. And then there's kind of the personal story that goes alongside that. So I'll start with the yoga story, and then I'll track back into the personal story.
Okay.
So my earliest awareness of yoga was when I was a small child, and my mum used to attend local yoga classes in Birmingham, and she would take a strip of carpet that was cut from when we must have had carpets changed, and she'd roll it up and take it along to the church hall to do her yoga there. And sometimes she'd tell me or show me a posture, and I remember trying to bend my legs into lotus posture when I was little and being fascinated by trying to drop back into real posture.
All the show-off things.
Yeah. And there was something that I really enjoyed about, like, wow, this is something that the body can do. How can I do this? And I tell you, I tried to practice them a lot. 40 years later, I'm not sure I'm any further with those. So that was very early, and then, didn't really have much contact with yoga for quite a lot of years. The next time it dominantly came into my life was age 19. So I'd gone to drama school to train to be an actor, and during that training I went over to Poland to work with a physical theatre company called Song of the Goat, and it was, well, unlike anything that I'd ever done before. It was incredibly physical, body-based. it was an international group of people, so there wasn't a common verbal language. Not everybody had English, for example. So the way that we worked was very body-based, movement, rhythm, very primal. And part of the process was developing a shared performance language. And it was, it's really long hours. It was physically very demanding. And at the end of those days, we'd have a also quite physically demanding yoga session that I guess was our cool down, but it certainly didn't feel like that to me at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
So then again, yoga kind of disappeared out of my life for a little while. And as I was working as an actor, so I worked in theatre for about 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
I would do various theatre projects, and often it would crop up in rehearsals as kind of a warm-up, because it so much gets you into your body, into connection with yourself, your own emotions, connection with other people, that it would kind of be there throughout various rehearsal processes. I established, along with my husband, we set up a community interest company, which was a theatre-based company working with marginalised groups in Salford called Happy Storm Theatre.
Wow.
And we did maybe 5 projects over 5 years. They were all funded by Arts Council England. I still feel like I have to give them a shout out whenever I mention the projects. Thank you, Arts Council England. And they enabled us to do some really amazing projects with groups like women's groups, so a project around domestic violence.
Wow, yeah, I read.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
On your website, yeah, I was like, wow, amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and with refugee communities, with addiction recovery centres, with prison and probation services. And the final project we came to was one about happiness. And so we'd started exploring and doing research around happiness. And usually we'd then go out and make community connections and kind of devise and work things through with different groups. But we didn't quite get to that stage, because at the point of researching, I was reading the Dalai Lama's book, The Art of Happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, there was such a simple message, which I must have read or come across thousands of times before. But at that moment in my life, it spoke to me. And it was about, find what makes you happy, do that. I was like, oh,
that's an option.
Good idea. Now, I'd really loved all the work that I'd done up until that point, but there was some kind of transition happening for me personally, where I'd started to develop a really regular yoga practice. And I'll come on to in a minute the things that it was actually helping me to work through. But it was something about that just really resonated. And I thought, you know what? It's yoga. Actually, that's where I find my peace, my contentment, my connection to myself. And so I started to follow this tiny little voice in the back of my head that said, oh, why don't you look at yoga teacher training? and for a while I went through the process of, oh, well, I'll just have a look, but I'm probably not going to be able to be a yoga teacher. That's not possible. And then even at the point where I'd applied and gone onto the course, I was still thinking, yeah, but I can't really do this, can I?
Why? Why did you think that?
Because I suppose I really looked up to the yoga teachers that I'd had, and I thought, I'm not good enough.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
Yeah. And so, things unfolded, one thing led to the next, and I did my teacher training, and then one of my regular teachers, about a few weeks after I'd finished my qualification, my first 200-hour qualification, she said, oh, I'm going back to Brazil for a month over Christmas. Why don't you teach my timetable of classes?
You're like,
I was like, oh my God.
I know.
Are you serious?
My teacher did the same to me, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Horrible.
But I'm so glad that she did, because it meant that I had a ready-made set of several classes every week to do over a month. And it really got me into the groove with it. So then I kind of then had this idea that as soon as I had my own first class, then that would be when I'd make the real transition from my previous life in theatre and the arts to actually being full-time in yoga. And so that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
So I'm going to flip back and go on to my personal journey that runs alongside that, because it's the personal journey that really takes me further from yoga then into yoga therapy and working with trauma. So this is kind of, depending on how I'm feeling on the day, this might be my tragic story or my survivor story.
Or your hero story.
A hero story.
Yeah, I know. It depends, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I read a little bit about you as well on your website, and I think there's probably some crossovers here in our own journeys. So, you know, looking back now, I understand that I was born into a long line of trauma and experienced developmental trauma in those early few years of my life as well. Without going into too much detail of other people's stories, my mum had a couple of sort of long voluntary stays in psychiatric hospital when I was around 3-4 years old. And at the time, my dad had his own stuff going on, and he was considering, you know, whether he would have me and my sister adopted if my mum didn't get better. So, you know, there was kind of all this bubbling away that I had not really any conscious awareness of. It's only in later years that I've learned a lot of this, but it kind of has helped things fit into place. So, you know, I say obviously now, it's obvious to me that I struggled a lot with things, with
uncertainty,
relationships,
intimacy,
being able to intimacy, connection to myself, emotional regulation, you know, really all the fundamental things that mean that we can then go off and explore. And
I think that's one thing we forget in our culture, that the basis of life is relationship. And the relationship is so intricate and so complex, especially in a complex society. So for that to be healthy, it's not easy.
And I think, you know, being able to find safety in relationship as well, because I think, you know, a lot of the ways that I coped with that was actually avoiding close relationships, even with myself as well, because you know, some of those early wounds were in relationships.
Yeah, of course.
So I developed different survival strategies or coping mechanisms, however you want to refer to them. Some of my earliest ones before the age of 10 were eating disorder. So anorexia was a way of, you know, regaining control. Even emotion regulation, I think, is tied up in that as well. And kind of making sense of the distress that you're experiencing.
Well, yeah, I think the control aspect is so important. In anorexia, you feel you have some control, some say in your life, at least, about something.
And something you can do something about as well. Yeah. And sort of later from that, things developed like obsessive compulsive behaviors, tendencies, self-injury. And I don't particularly subscribe to diagnoses, but I'm going to kind of use a few terms here just as, I guess, a bit of a shorthand of ways of understanding some of the processes that were happening for me. So
it's a reference point.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, you know, and it is kind of a language that a lot of people are used to working with and familiar with. So I experienced complex PTSD as well as PTSD, depression, anxiety. I lost several jobs when I was a bit older through panic attacks and agoraphobia that came out of that, and then had a breakdown in my early 20s. And so this was around the time that yoga really started to come into my life in a big way. And at first, yoga was another tool of self-punishment, of pushing myself too far, of creating pain in the body to make sense of the emotional pain, ways of pushing through, numbing out, disconnecting. So that was my initial yoga practice. And, you know, as you can imagine, it was probably physically quite strong, as in a strong physical practice. But as it developed over the years, as I changed and, you know, sought other therapies as well to kind of gain greater understanding about myself, it actually then transformed, and yoga became then a vehicle to actually reconnect, to take care of this body, to really relate to it in a way that I don't think I ever truly had before. So for me, it kind of went through a stage of having to separate a bit from the body and see it almost as other, to feel that it was something that actually needed to be taken care of and treated with some kind of respect. And yeah. So it kind of became my therapy alongside some other things that I was doing. So I always knew from that kind of shift in yoga that when I went into yoga teaching, it would be the therapeutic side of things and actually helping to connect people to yoga in a way that is therapeutic and that can actually help them with some of those trauma-based patterns and reactions and survival strategies. So that's really what then led me down the trauma therapy and yoga therapy route. And I trained with Drew Yoga in yoga therapy, and then did, as you mentioned, various other kind of not necessarily strictly yoga-based trainings to draw in the kind of the most up-to-date understandings of trauma from lots of different modalities.
Wow, yes. What a journey.
Mm.
Yeah, and I do totally relate to your story. It's very similar to my story, but yeah, not as traumatic with the family, with your mum and that uncertainty at a very young age. But yeah, I also did yoga as a self-punishment for a very long time. And I think a lot of yoginis do, without knowing it. There's one point that you realize, and for me that was burnout. When I burnt out, I realized I was still using yoga, even though I'd already done yoga therapy trainings. It was still self-punishment and not being able to forgo my guilt, just sitting with the guilt of not doing something. Yeah. So that was, Okay. So I wanted to ask you, because you do a mind-body approach to mental health, why is the body so important in trauma therapy or healing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to trauma, I think it's really an integral part of the healing process, because trauma isn't only, and I don't say only as in minimizing it, but it's not exclusively in thoughts, in how we think about things, even in how we relate to things or our emotions, but it's actually stored at a really fundamental level in our nervous system and in our body. And I'll just say a little bit more about what I mean by that. So when it's stored in the nervous system, I mean in terms of our automatic reactions to things. So when we get a reaction of, let's say, anger, something gets triggered and we have this anger response and it makes us want to lash out or to put the defenses up. Well, that's a trauma reaction that's stored in the nervous system. When we're speaking in front of a group of people at work and we get this fear response that makes us just want to run out of the room, that has its roots in trauma as well, because, you know, if we look at the situation, what's the reality? Well, you're in front of a group of people who may or may not agree with or like what you say, but it's not the kind of situation that requires you to run out of a room, and yet that's the programmed response that's there. So we're always responding to our perception of what's happening, which is based on what's happened to us before and what we expect and what we project onto the situation. So how primed our nervous system is to go into a fight-flight response or into a shut-down, disconnected, dissociated response, that's based in our past trauma patterns. And the more that gets triggered, the more easily it gets triggered, the less conscious free will we have, because actually those centers of our brains where we can think through things and think, oh, is this actually a dangerous situation or not? They go offline. And so we're left with these much older automatic patterns.
Yeah, and I also read in one of my books that the part of the nervous system that is cognitive and thinking is much slower than the emotional. So if there's a trigger, it's in that emotional system which reacts quickly.
Yeah. I think it's something like it's a fraction of a second that it would take us longer to
think. I've got it written down somewhere. It's like 20 meters a second for the cognitive brain and 60 to 70 meters for the emotional brain per second.
Oh, I like that. Yeah,
so it's a lot faster. It's 3 times as fast, the emotional nervous system. Yeah.
So that's what we want when we're facing a threat, isn't it? We want that quicker response for when we are actually facing, like for when we need to step back out of the road because a car's whizzing by. We don't want to waste those extra precious moments thinking about whether they've seen us or, it's not practical. And then the other bit I mentioned about the body and how the body stores things. We all have our own unique posture and movement patterns and breathing patterns. And actually we can trace those back too. So the parts of the body perhaps that hold chronic tension for us, that have braced, or the parts that are chronically collapsed because we've had that experience of maybe helplessness or not being able to get out of a situation. All that is also in the musculature and the connective tissue of the body.
Yeah, so the nervous system has this pattern and then the body starts to accommodate that, and then at some point it becomes structural or muscular.
Yeah, and then later down the line, maybe even we get into disease, conditions, illnesses, chronic pain.
Yeah. So I was looking on your website and you do yoga therapy, but you also do trauma therapy. And I'd like to understand, or for listeners to understand, what's the difference? Why do you differentiate between the two?
So trauma therapy is the umbrella term for all the different modalities that I have. So people come to see me for trauma therapy, and then we might draw on different approaches like yoga therapy, for example. So the reason that I kind of term it in that way is with every person, more or less, I usually have an integrated approach. So I think there will always be yoga therapy in there because everybody benefits from some regulation at the beginning of sessions and at the first part of working together. That might be a few sessions for some people, it might be a year for others to actually really establish self-regulation so that as we go into some of the more difficult stuff, we know we've got a route to get back and to regulate so that we're not going to reinforce those trauma patterns. Actually, we're going to build a new pattern of safety in the system. So it might be that I draw on lots of different modalities over the time of working with somebody, but it all comes under the branch of trauma therapy.
So it's all pretty much trauma therapy, and you use all the modalities in most of your sessions. Okay. Yeah. And one thing I'd like that you said was, if you can breathe, you can do yoga. In your yoga therapy, because a lot of people think, well, yoga therapy, I can't touch my toes. So that's not going to happen.
I don't think I was the first person to say that. I can't remember who said it, but I know I heard it on my yoga therapy training, and it really stuck with me.
Yeah. Okay, so you already answered this, but do you also do one of your modalities and then incorporate yoga therapy, or it's all blended for you?
So I think of myself as a yoga therapist who does EFT, EMDR, safe and sound protocol, whatever it might be. But that to me means that it's really about my connection to myself when I'm with a person, and also how I hold that space for them, so that actually I'm giving them the relationship and the context so that healing can happen within them. I'm not really going in and doing anything, you know. So yoga therapy that's really the essence of who I am, how I practice, the texts that I might go back to, and then any of the other techniques come in at various points. So maybe they've got a really specific memory that's coming back to them in flashbacks. Well, we might then use EMDR for a block of sessions or EFT for a block of sessions. But then we kind of always have this baseline of body integrating with whatever else might be going on.
And for the EMDR, you don't need to be a psychoanalyst to get this training? Can anyone get this training? Because I've heard a lot of good...
Yeah, there are requirements. I can't remember what they are. So it's quite, you know, my qualifications aren't very typical or conventional. So it's quite common for me to have to put a case forwards for me doing whatever training I've done. And I think I seem to remember having some sort of process to go through with the EMDR as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, because I'm also trying to find shortcuts, but I know it's probably not the best way to do. But sometimes it's like, I don't have 4 years to train. Well, I do, but yeah, there's so many other things to do as well. Okay, so you have this 8-week program for yoga for anxiety and depression with many great reviews, and it's about undoing patterns of anxiety and depression. Can you explain that? Because the patterns are body, breath, nervous system, and mind. I think we touched on it before, but maybe a little bit more for people.
So it's a course that I ran maybe about 20, 25 times over the years, but I've since retired that course because I've just got such a full one-to-one clinic that I don't really have the capacity to hold a group as well. So when we used to do it, the first part of it is really similar to how I work with people one-to-one, which is about getting to know the body, the nervous system, and how to recognize which branch of the nervous system is active for you. So are you in the fight-flight survival mode? Are you in the shutdown survival mode? Are you in the mode of connection, playfulness, curiosity, steadiness, calm? Once you can actually identify which one you're in, then you can select appropriate things to do for yourself, whether it's movement, whether it's breathing, whether it's going and walking outside, that are going to help you to regulate and interrupt those patterns. So we could think of depression as being in a chronic shutdown state. So there's a clear physiology to that. We could think of anxiety as being in the fight-flight state, that kind of hyper-aroused, alert, hyper-vigilant. You know, I think most people could probably relate to that feeling, at least every now and then in their life, kind of feeling really wired, tense, pent up.
I think the anxiety thing, it's even, there was a point that I was rushing. I'd like to be in that state because it gives you a lot of energy. And a lot of us need to run on that high level of energy. Yeah.
Well, you know, that's where we can even trace that back to our earliest environments. Because what is it that happened in those first few years that means that's such a comfortable, and I use comfortable sort of in inverted commas, such a familiar state
to be
that we feel like that's what we need in order to be able to just function. But then, like you mentioned earlier, what comes after that is the crash, because it's not sustainable. It uses a lot of our body's resources to keep that going. It's designed to get us out of there.
Yeah.
It's not designed for everyday living.
Yeah.
So actually the beautiful thing about yoga is, and that I used to do on this course, is that there's so many entry points. So you could enter this through the breath, and you could work to accept the breath, and then maybe to influence the breath, which will influence your nervous system, which will influence your experience of anxiety or depression or other states, or you could enter through the body. So if you're in a state of depression, even tiny movements can begin to bring a bit more energy back into the body so that you can shift out of that pattern. So we're just kind of introducing new patterns into the system in all those different layers.
Yeah, it's like breaking it all up a little by little and letting energy flow again.
Yeah.
Letting it come to life. Yeah.
It's
such beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to watch people go, oh, wow, I don't have to do something big to feel better. Yeah.
One of the pivotal weeks in that 8-week course was always where I would do a bit more of the explanation about those different fight, flight, shutdown responses, because, people just don't know that stuff. It's not as common knowledge as we might assume. No.
I keep thinking everyone knows about it.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's why over the incarnations in this course, I really built it in, because I was coming in with assumed knowledge. And actually, people don't know why they feel butterflies. But when you understand that when you're in the fight-flight response, digestion isn't a priority, so blood gets diverted away from the digestive organs, you can kind of go, oh yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, of course I've got a dry mouth, because saliva is part of digestion. Of course my heart's beating, because it believes that I'm about to do something really physical, so it's trying to transport oxygen around my body. And of course I'm breathing faster to get more oxygen. So actually making sense of those things and being able to befriend the body can really take a lot of the fear out.
Exactly. I think that's the biggest aspect of it being an issue, is that we don't know how to relate to it. And once you can build a relationship with it, it's not a monster or a shadow or... Yeah. Oh, so good, Suzi. Yeah. And I love how you explain it so practically. So tell us, what are you so passionate about now? What are you doing in your yoga therapy one-to-one sessions, or what have you discovered?
So I guess the things that I find myself working with a lot is childhood trauma. I see a lot of people who've experienced childhood sexual abuse. It's interesting over the years how the people that come to me have slightly changed. So it's funny to think of, what am I passionate about? Because it's really shaped by the people that I work with. For example, nobody comes to see me now for structural back pain. They just don't. And I love working with backs, but it's not really what's at the core of me. I think it's working with those complex traumas, those really early issues that create problems for people in life 50, 60 plus years down the line. I feel like that's where I can really be of value.
Because you understand it. And can I ask, how do you think emotions are tied into all of this? Where do you see them if you're looking at the different aspects: body, mind, nervous system, physiology, psych?
So I'll go to Eckhart Tolle. He says that emotions are the body's reaction to the mind. And it takes a little bit or it is for me anyway, to kind of digest that. But it really ties in with the compassionate inquiry approach that I'm partway through the training of with Gabor Mate at the moment. How when we start to inquire about these upsets we get in our day-to-day life now, we can start to understand, what is it I'm reacting to? And what I'm reacting to is my perception. So I might feel angry, and I'm angry because that person let me down. Well, the anger is a response to the perception that somebody let me down. What actually happened is the person didn't arrive at the meeting point when they said they were going to. So I've kind of projected onto that, they let me down. So that's where the emotion is, the body's reaction to the mind or the perception. Because emotions are in the body, that's where we experience them. They're reactions within the body, within the chemistry of the body, the musculature of the body.
Mm-hmm. Do you talk about them with your clients? Do you explain or try and expound on them?
Yeah, so I guess my usual approach would be curiosity with the client to kind of find out what it means to them. And, often I find that people who've been through trauma can find it very difficult to feel emotions because part of the survival strategy has been to
Ignore
disconnect
them
from them. Yeah. They can also find it difficult to put them into words, perhaps because early in life they didn't have somebody there helping them to put words to what they were going through. They were just trying to lock it away or not feel it. And sometimes there's also another piece to that, which is they feel like everyone else knows something that they don't. So the last thing I want to do is to come in with my idea of emotions and kind of put that on the client.
Okay.
So I'm kind of curious.
You think it's too many steps ahead already?
No, it's just like, what do I know? I mean, like,
okay, in that sense.
I have my own experience of anger or guilt, but who's to say that's anything like what you feel? Or, there's so many different theories and philosophies around emotions as well.
Yeah, no, I'm writing a book on him. That's why I'm asking. But yeah, the thing I want to get across is that there is a whole spectrum. There's not just anger, sadness, and resentment or whatever. There is so much, and just trying to feel them for what they are rather than labeling them. It makes a huge difference.
I think that the biggest value is somebody's felt experience of whatever it is. Only second to that is the words that they might use to communicate that to me or even to themselves. So, I would always go with what's the felt perception of it. And then if there's words you want to put it into, great, I can then understand even more about that. But actually the primary thing is you feeling and experiencing your own emotions.
But like we were just saying before, if you can name it, and it doesn't have to be the name of the emotion, but the qualities. Is it warm? Is it contracting? Is it opening? Is it quick? Is it painful? It makes it relatable. And then again, it's not this shadow anymore.
Yeah, totally. And I think with yoga as well, whether it's yoga therapy or yoga or trauma-informed yoga, we can practice yoga without a felt experience, or we can practice with a felt experience. And I think one of the routes for working with trauma is actually to invite that felt experience rather than just kind of going through the motions and detaching.
Is it also about finding safety in the body? Yeah.
100%.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that Porges, founder of Polyvagal Theory, says is that safety isn't the absence of threat. It's the presence of connection.
That's beautiful. That's a good one. Yeah. So true. Okay, Suzi, I have no more questions for you. But you have so much knowledge. Is there anything else you would love to share, or something you feel we haven't touched on?
I think maybe kind of like a little glimmer of hope for people that perhaps are really early in this journey or are not even ready to reach out for help. That quite often when people come to see me, they've been through lots of services. They might have even been turned away from various therapists or services or therapies. And so people often carry one of two ideas about themselves, which, have very early roots when it comes to view of themselves in terms of therapy. One is, I'm too complicated, I'm too complex, I'm too much, you're not going to be able to help me. And the other one is, my problems aren't big enough, what happened to me isn't worth going to trauma therapy for. Those are two sides of the same coin, and both are rooted in trauma. You know, one of the things that I find working with people is people are often really surprised about, even in some of the early sessions, about the impact of doing very simple, very small things on how they feel. And we know from Deb Dana's work on Polyvagal Theory that our state gives us our story. So if our nervous system state is one of shutdown, we're going to have a very different story about ourselves and our world compared to a few hours later when we might be in fight flight. We have a very different view of ourselves and the world, a very different story, even about our life history.
Yes, it's so true. Like, I just wanted to say, it's the same with the body dysmorphia. I still have body dysmorphia. Do you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I can feel good, and I look in the mirror and go, God, I look wonderful. And then something happens, or you think something, and then you feel crap, and then you look back in the mirror and you're like, oh no, I look terrible.
It's really interesting that you say that, because a surprising piece of recovery for me has been, and I'm not suggesting this is the way or recommending this to anybody, but what it's been for me, one of the last pieces was accepting that I experience myself in a way that, you know, perhaps is not accurate to what might be there, but really coming to terms with that. Like, what would it mean if I was a certain weight or a certain size, and kind of really making friends with that, even though I also know that it's not accurate information.
Yeah, I'm only just coming to terms with that the last few weeks. It's amazing. I'm like 46. Yeah, 30 years ago, and it's like, well, if I'm a bit bigger, can I just love myself that way? Yeah,
exactly.
So what?
yeah. And it also, you know, it's no surprise to me that I experience myself in a warped way.
No,
because I didn't have an accurate, you know, human mirror growing up.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good analogy. Yeah. Oh, very good. Very insightful. Thank you. But we steered off course. What were we talking about before this?
So I was saying about how surprised people can be at the shifts that they get, even when they've maybe been through talk therapy for years and years. And when they experience that visceral shift, one, it gives them a sense of, oh, I can do things that influence how I feel. And that can be a really big eye-opener for people. But also that then their whole perspective on therapy, whether anything can help them, how they're doing, where they should be on their recovery journey, all of that starts to shift as well when they're in a different nervous system state. So, you know, whether people feel like they're too complicated or the problems aren't serious enough, actually trauma therapy can really start to make some visceral shifts for people in a fairly short amount of time.
Yes.
I'm not saying this is like a quick fix by any means. I often work with people for years.
But I agree. I've also worked with some people, it's more than 3 years, and they still relapse, but you said the right word, it's experiential. They feel it, so it's theirs, and no one can take that away. Knowing that you can experience that state. For sure, it doesn't stay because nothing stays, but it's there. There's access to it. Yeah, so important. And I see also people arriving to that shift very quickly, or sometimes for the first time, where other modalities haven't been able to touch that part. And
I think that's sometimes just the glimmer of hope. Because it's not something that you have to believe or buy into. you know, you experience it for yourself. It's real.
Yeah.
It's visceral.
Yeah.
So, you know,
It's
that can be
embodied.
enough then. It's embodied. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Suzi. This has been really lovely.
Yes, it has. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice getting to know you. Do you want to leave us with a practice?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to take you through a practice that I often do in some form with people early on. It's a practice to, by the way, I always include the client in discussion about what we're doing, why I'm suggesting it. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of that with you rather than just kind of giving you a practice.
Good.
So the thought I have around this is that it helps to develop interoception, so the ability to feel into the body and sense what's going on there. Because after all, that's the basis of our gut reactions that tell us what's good for us, what's nourishing, what's bad for us. It's the basis of emotion. But rather than go into emotion first, because it can be really overwhelming if you've spent a lifetime disconnecting from emotion. Yeah. It's based much more in, so in yogic terms, the anamaya kosha, so sensations, kind of a bit more, perhaps kind of like the building blocks of what might go into the experience of an emotion. And if you're up for it, I'd love you to co-create this with me and help me come up with a list of possible sensations that a person in a body might experience. And then I'll kind of pair them as I guide you through the exercise.
Yeah, sure.
So it can be anything from textures to temperatures.
Sweaty.
I'm feeling that one. Yeah.
We're both sitting in a room where we've closed the windows because outside is noisy and it's very sunny today. Okay. So I'll just give you qualities and sensations.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay. Happy, open, free flow, tingling, a kind of warm rush towards the head, or from heat.
Yeah.
Clammy on the hands.
Yeah.
Numbness in certain parts.
Yeah.
Holding.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for that, Shira. Can I ask you to give me some sensations that you might feel from, like maybe fabrics or things that your skin's in contact with, some sort of skin level things? What kind of words would you like to include?
Soft.
Yeah.
Smooth.
Yeah.
Itchy.
Yeah.
No breeze. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah. Lovely, that's perfect. Thank you for that. So what I'll do then is I'll guide you for maybe, have we got 6 or 7 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Great. And I'll guide you through some of these sensations. Some of them I'm going to pair with other words as well, so that we've got some contrast to feel into. Before we go into this, is there a place in your body currently that feels comfortable, that could be an anchor for you to come back to?
My belly.
Great. So any point during this that I name a sensation that you don't want to go to, you can come back to this anchor in your belly. So you can just do that as and when you choose.
Okay. I'll mute myself, yeah? Or do you still want feedback?
No, I don't need it, but if there's anything that you want to say in the middle, feel free to say it.
All right.
So I'm just going to guide you for the next 5, 6, 7 minutes, something like that. If you're listening to practicing this as well, they're very welcome to close their eyes or keep their eyes open, or even half close the eyes. And I'm just going to guide you to be curious about different sensations that may or may not be present in your body. So it's a practice of curiosity. The aim isn't to find all of these sensations. If you do, you can stay there. If you find yourself going to an area of the body that you don't really want to go to right now, you can also skip. You can go back to the previous area or return back to your anchor. So to begin with, I'm going to invite you to see if there's a place in your body that feels warm. And if you've got several to choose from, you can just select one where it's okay for you to linger and just let your attention rest there. Notice the size and shape of that area. Whether that warmth is on the surface or a bit deeper. And whether it has any texture or colour or smell. It's not necessary to come up with those things. Everyone's brain works in slightly different ways. So only if that resonates with you. And then see if there's a place in the body now that feels cool or cooler by comparison to that area. See if there's a place that feels cooler than that warm area. And if there is, you can let your attention settle there. Notice the size and shape of that area. Whether it seems deep or shallow. Whether it has any colour or texture or smell. Let that go when you're ready. You can be curious about whether there's an area of the body that feels sweaty or damp. And if you notice an area that feels damp or sweaty, you can let your attention rest there, taking in the size and shape. Maybe you even imagine if you could draw an outline around it, and how shallow or deep it might be. And anything else that you notice there in that area of dampness, sweatiness. And see if there's a contrasting area that seems dry. An area that doesn't have that dampness or sweatiness. And if there is, let your attention rest there. Taking in the size, shape, how deep or shallow. Just get to know that area. And let your attention move to a place where you can feel your clothes in contact with your body. An area that it feels okay to linger on. Choose a small area, smaller than the palm of your hand. As you tune into that area, just notice what the feel of the fabric is like, just from that area of skin. Is it smooth, soft? Is it itchy or rough? Is it loosely hanging on the skin, or is it pressing in? And then let your attention move once again to a place where you can feel the air in contact with the skin. A place on your skin that's exposed to the air. And choose again a small area, smaller than the size of the palm. And notice in that area, is the air still? Is there any movement of air or breeze? Can you pick up anything else about the air? Is it warm or cool? Does it feel thick or thin? Just find out what there is to know about the air in that area that you've chosen. And finally return down to your anchor. Just bring your anchor to that place in your body where it felt okay. That draws that practice to a close. Whenever you feel ready, if you've had the eyes closed, you can let them reopen. Maybe just have a little look around the room that you're in and spot something in your room that you like. Either because you like the object or the colour that reminds you of something. Just one thing that you like. I've spotted a plant that I like, and it's kind of growing towards the window.
Thank you, Suzi. That was lovely.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's really nice to feel those differences and to move between them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the depth. I never thought about doing depth. I've also suggested people feel shape, color, but depth and really to draw an outline makes it very concrete.
Yeah.
And I was looking at a beautiful painting of Devi right in front of me, so that made me really happy.
I always like to reorient at the end as well, to reconnect to the here and now, to exactly what's around you, and and if it's possible, something that's pleasant or that kind of connects you back again to that internal sense of okayness.
Yes, it's very important, especially in trauma. Yeah. Okay, my dear, we're coming to an end. So thank you very much for being here. I've really enjoyed this. And
me too.
Yeah, really wonderful to get to know you. Any links, anything you want to leave people with, I will put them in show notes, but you can also just plug in right here and tell people what you would like.
So I guess the things that I've got space on are some of the professional trainings I do. So my waiting list for one-to-one therapy is about 50 people long. So if people are kind of ready for therapy, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that they can sit on my waiting list. But, of course, I'm always happy to hear from people and can have people if they want. I run a few professional training courses. So I've got one in September, which is for clinical psychologists or the clinicians talk therapists, which is about how to integrate the body more into talk therapies. I think it's a really key area. That's full in September, but there are places available for February. It's online as well, online. Then I have a 2-day trauma training for yoga teachers that I run every few months throughout the year. That's also live online at the moment as well. So the next available one is March, I think.
Yeah, next year. I had a look.
Oh, did you?
I was like, maybe I should.
And then this year I've just launched the 100-hour accredited trauma-informed yoga course. So that starts in October. I only have 2 places left on that, and you already have to have done the 2-day course.
Yeah.
So that probably won't apply to most people. But I imagine that will be a 12-month or 18-month intake. So if people are interested, they can always go on the waiting list for the next one as well. I have already got a waiting list started for that.
Wow, you're a busy lady. That's good. Very good. I'm very glad. Yeah. Okay, we'll say goodbye. Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Yeah. So thank you everyone for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Bye.